Sorry guys, we just had the issues with the battery going flat again. So guys, the answer is yes. It's without question that regulation is an imperative. And if you look closely at the interconnections that Onchain have with the government, even at the very local level, with the Guyang government, it's a local government, there are, and also if we look at the bigger picture with MIIT and with the CFCA, they are heavily involved with Onchain. And when we understand the interconnections between Onchain and Neo through the NeoX cross-compatible protocol, we know that that's significant, and regulation is paramount. Because obviously the interest for Onchain is for it to be co-supported with government entities, and Da Hongfei has always had a good relationship with the government because he has his his finger in both the private and the public pie of blockchain, and that is without doubt one of the most advantageous positions to be in the blockchain. Very few can even say that, but Da has very much set this up so that it has great potential for the future. Other things. Now this is really important. This is a big, long-winded question, but I just want to focus on Fosun and Onchain. So here the question broaches some facts, and the facts are Onchain, yes, it's backed by Fosun, which is one of the largest fintech-related companies in China. It is a for-profit and it's designed to make money. Yes, that's true. Neo is designed to be a non-for-profit. Well, interesting perception. Essentially what Neo is trying to be is it's trying to be a open source, a decentralized asset structure. It's designed to be a community-driven project to adopt business via the public domain, and Ontology is doing that. It's supporting that possibility through its trust network. So the focus is actually building its capacity and regarding it not so much necessarily for a non-profit, but rather trying to profit its investors, because it functions just like any other shareholding in any other company but it's done from the community out. It's not done from a closed source, and in that respect like its counterpart in Onchain. So let's focus on the answer with regard to how it all works. Fosun is a strategic investor of Onchain. Although Onchain and Fosun have no direct interest in Neo, and this is important, they don't necessarily have any direct interest because one's private and one's public, Onchain stakeholders are clearly aware that Onchain will not succeed without Neo's success. Now that can't be, that is just, honestly, that is a sentence in gold, because if you are a major private consortium, or if you're a major private blockchain entity, and when I said before about Fosun being such a powerful company in China and having invested so much money into Onchain, when you know that it can't work without Neo working, that just makes me more bullish on Neo without trying to FOMO the whole situation. Because NeoX is firstly that bridge, then you have this trust mechanism that's public. This tripartite system is what is going to strengthen the asset value of Neo in so many ways. And when you recognize all the interlinks and all of the connections between these, especially between Onchain and Neo, you start to really see the value of the asset. Some other points to mention is the mission of Onchain is never to take Neo's market share, but to foster the ecosystem and to benefit in return. And again, NeoX is proof of this that's coming. Neo is a permissionless, meaning trustless, meaning open source, meaning network for the people. Enterprise, financial institutions and government agencies will always hesitate to connect to open networks due to privacy, secrecy and regulation concerns. We know this from Generation 1 blockchains. Onchain and Ontology can act as a buffer, as a conduit, as a support, connecting mainstream business and the Neo network. So again, this is exactly what Onchain and Ontology are about, is trying to uplift the value of Neo as an asset and also provide the public sector with the very much needed private blockchains that they demand. And that obviously is a key requisite in the Chinese market as well. So this is just some things I wanted to talk about today in terms of brainstorming. So here is the first graphic. This was uploaded to the Ontology network's own Twitter. So they must have looked at it and thought it had some valid points. But essentially I divided into these three parts to better understand it as a graphic. So in the purple you have Onchain, and there are many things I want to talk about there. Firstly, the Guyang government, they had these direct support systems in place to essentially foster and better unpack how Onchain as a private entity can support the government. Now that's interesting because the government is not a private entity. It is a public system in which it supports the people through services. And that is essentially, that has correlations directly with the Ontology Trust system. Then Onchain is divided into three parts. It's divided into a legal chain, a security company, and an identity chain. And as I've been reading more and more about the legal chain, which is also perhaps known as law chain, you quickly learn that Microsoft is a key founder. It's a key part of it, right from the very beginning. And that's interesting because right from the beginning of Neo also, Microsoft was involved in partnership. So Onchain is permissioned, it's trusted, it has an absolutely direct link with Hyperledger. Again, a huge consortium that inside that has major banks as well. So there are strategic partnerships there. The council, it's also on the council for the CBT and the IDF by the MIIT. So again, there's some very strong links there with industries within the governmental frame. So just think about those things and then remember that it supports Neo via NeoX. It's going to, and that's going to become more clear as that product is released. So let's go to Ontology next. Ontology is a trust system. It makes business possible because decentralized ID and distributed data can be verified and can be interacted and transacted as the ecosystem builds. It is a trustless distribution data ID mapping system, and what sets it apart from the others that I've mentioned in other parts of the world where they're working with other blockchains like Ethereum is that this one is a public supported and it supports public blockchains. It's a public network, and that's what is quite amazing about that, and it's what distinguishes it from Onchain. It is a network for chains using protocols and APIs. It uses ONT contracts and those ONT contracts are specifically about business process controls, not actual business. And so that's where it's interesting because if you go across to Neo now, what Neo's dApps are about is the actual business. The business is the asset. And inside Neo, you have these three parts of Neo ID, Neo Asset, and Neo Contract. Together, they provide for a framework for business. And it's not just business, it's mainstream business, and through NeoX it can potentially advantage all of the corporate business as well. So Neo as a focus is about primary digital asset provider on Ontology. So again, that's how Ontology can support it. So Ontology can actually facilitate by making it the primary asset on Ontology as well. So it's very cool. So these two are permissionless by design in that one is the network, one is the trustless system, and then across on Onchain you have the permissioned counterpart. I like to call that the Neoverse, and I'm really excited that that all this stuff is happening, but we don't really have a name for what all of this is together collectively. So for now we can call it the Neoverse, just for fun. All right, the next thing I want to talk to you about is some other stuff I wrote, just some ideas. This one is trying to explain a little bit of the distinctions between Onchain and Neo and Ontology. So there's a broken line in the middle to represent the division or the divide between the private and the public worlds. So on the private, you have Onchain as a blockchain system. And if you notice, I put DNA throughout all of the little circles that mind map from that. And that's because DNA is very important as a protocol that's going to allow Onchain to build out its company so that it can more and more decentralized models and distributed information or decentralized business can function. And the reason why they want to do that is because essentially decentralized models of business are cheaper than centralized. And they have put three things in place to make sure that data and identity can be supported and that digital signatures exist. And these are called identity chain, law chain, and the security chain. Those three function similarly to how Ontology system works, but they do that in the private domain. So remember also that it's based on Hyperledger's global standards. So there's a direct IBM link there, and again, Onchain is a direct member of Hyperledger, which means it explains more about why on earth Hyperledger, why the Onchain and Neo interests are in Hyperledger and why they're interested in Stellar, because Stellar is directly linked to Hyperledger through its partnership. So it all comes to light, and obviously there's some big events happening at the moment with Stellar and Neo. So let's talk about the next part here with Neo and Ontology. So I put them together. There's a gas rail. I'll actually go further than that drawing also and explain that there's even there's more token relationships in this connection than we know with all four of them, with the 2 governance tokens and the 2 utility tokens. But I don't want to speak of things that I don't exactly understand yet, but I know that there are connections. Another thing to mention here is that Neo has one of the very best virtual machines in existence for all blockchain, and that can't be understated because that is what is a key engine for making Neo so powerful, not just for itself but for other ecosystems that can append it. So what I've done in the black there, as you can see, I've written DBFT optional, and that's because there's no reason why the DBFT protocol that underpins Neo couldn't be utilized in other blockchain scenarios and other ecosystems. But it is an option, it's not required, because essentially all kinds of businesses can append as smart contracts, they can append as thriving ecosystems using Neo, so that's great. But more importantly, what can happen through the pluggability aspect is Ontology has the capacity for all kinds of blockchain and technologies and non-blockchain technologies. It can be just a protocol level to tap in, to plug into the Ontology Trust Network. And I've given you some examples. So proof of work, proof of stake, DBFTs, PBFTs, LFTs, whatever they are, they can certainly plug in from the blockchain standpoint into the Trust Network. And that means it's a hyper-connective. It's a hyper-connective through cross-chain, cross-platform, cross-device. And we're seeing more and more of how valuable that can be. So we can see there's links between the 2 public components of Neo and Ontology, and we can see that interlink with the private counterpart of Onchain. So let's move across to the very next sort of graphic I want to talk about, and that is this one here. So this one here is essentially just a drawing I made up of to show you that Onchain through its DNA from one end, and then we've got Neo at the other. And I want to just focus here on Ethereum. Ethereum is a public blockchain as well, as you guys would know. It is a generation 2 blockchain, and it was the first to offer dApps in its ability for them to append onto its system. What is interesting though, it also has a very, very sophisticated virtual machine, not as good as Neo's, but it's good. And it's more and more tech has been built into it. So we've got Raiden coming up, we've got potentially Plasma, and we've got other things coming to make it much more scalable. One of the things that need to be talked about is Microsoft Azure's Coco. And that's because there is no question that Microsoft is also going to working with Ethereum to build out its capacity of trust and scalability. And you can go and check out these on their websites. But essentially, this is where the private meets the public domain in terms of trust into trustless spaces. So for anyone to go and say that Ethereum is the idealistic, completely decentralized model, like the original premise of what the first white paper ever written for blockchain was about, it's not the case, because for Ethereum to thrive in business, it's also doing the same sort of thing as Neo, in that it's trying to assemble a very robust system so that businesses can actually have confidence in the use and application of Ethereum. Remember one thing also though is that there's no way that can happen until Ethereum goes completely proof of stake. And remember, Neo goes one step further, having its delegated Byzantine fault tolerance protocol. It makes it even more secure through its system. And as we know, there are many interoperabilities coming for Onchain and for Neo in this space. So what I perceive in the future is for all of these to interoperate, for Ethereum to interoperate with Neo via the cross-platform capacities. So it's interesting. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about was basically some key points come from the Onchain website. And one of the things was that based on DNA, enterprise-level consortium or private chain can be quickly implemented. So again, it's about the quick implementation, it's about the quick adoption, mass adoption for on-chain utilizing the DNA. It's self-coded, open source, so it's released to all who want to use it, and that's the reason for the on-sell, to get people on board. Hyperledger global standards, on-chain local China practice. So these are some key fundamentals for on-chain, and you can see through the conduits of NeoX that that's going to be beneficial massively for Neo. There's a graphic here I just want to talk about. This is just some evidence that the source I can get to you. I've linked them on Twitter many times, but Neo and Microsoft Azure, in August they had a training program. Microsoft Azure's product was released only this year, late in the year in August, my understanding is, and within about a week later, there was a training program happening literally in Onchain and Neo. So you can see that there's direct links, and if you go far enough back, you'll see them right at the partnership levels. So just some more posts with regard to trying to unpack how they all relate. So let's talk about it in a really simplistic sense. Ontology Network is a blockchain distributed ledger network, which combines distributed identity verification, data exchange, data collabs, procedure protocols, communities, attestations, which just means that you can edit information outside of the main blockchain, various industry-specific modules. Together, this builds a huge infrastructure for a peer-to-peer trust network, and that's what sets this apart, as I said, with private models. It's peer-to-peer, it's cross-system, cross-industry, cross-application, cross-device, which is all freaking really cool. Ont has a token system to support different scenarios, such as incentivization, smart contracts, and data exchange, which is really cool. Let's go to the next key point. So what's the interrelationship to finish off? What's the interrelationship between Ontology Network, Neo, and Onchain? Well, Ont and Neo are separate projects. Yep, we've talked about that. Onchain is a private company. Yep, we've talked about that. That provides technical support for both. And that's important because they are all interrelated in terms of support. At the distributed ledger, smart contract level, so let's go across to that level with the dApps. Ont and Neo have similar architectures. That's true. And they have with different implementations. So Ont is written in the Golang or Go language, and Neo is written in C# at that level, at that smart contract level, ledger level. At the protocol application level, Neo focuses on digital assets, and that's where we're getting into the crux of the DBFT and why it exists, and how it's premised, how the focus is on the asset as the means of value, or the marker of value. And Neo, including Neo ID and other services. Getting back to, whereas Ont focuses on the connection and mapping of different identity services. Again, it's an overarching system that is not just about housing Neo, but they have absolute direct, associations that are far more significant than the other ones that will utilize the network. But essentially it's a pluggable network whereby all kinds of blockchain and protocol services can interact in ways we haven't even yet seen. And finally, both Ont and Neo are infrastructure platforms that support different dApp developments. And that can't be understated, because the purpose of dApps in one world, which is the Ont world, is for distributed data, distributed identity, verifications. That's the whole reason why the dApps will exist. So they'll interrelate, because this dApp will support the dApps, the business dApps, and the business dApps can work in both. But fundamentally, all business dApps will interrelate to Neo as the asset as well. And remember also, Neo will provide clearing and settlement services on Ontology as well. So even more interrelationships there. Very cool stuff. So the thing I wanted to talk about now is, if you're going to think of an Ontology, don't just think of it as another dApp inside Neo. Think of it as what I've written down as the ultimate level of trust, sitting above the dApps that are coming in, like the key, for example, or like if you want to look at very new ones. So we've got things like, I'll show you in a moment. But the thing is that this is a layer of trust that is going to basically mean that many, many, many more businesses are going to come in the form of dApps in the future. So let's just look in the last month. We've seen these happen. We've seen Neo Industries evolve, and we're going to see a lot more of these. So we've seen things like Neo Publishing, advertising, data and ID, distribution and management industries evolve, data exchange, medical, telecommunication, data storage, computing, finance, creative industries, artificial intelligence. And you can see here, this is just the beginning for Neo. And these are very significant companies, but above this layer is trust. These guys would never have come on board if there wasn't this layer of trust that was situated above it to inform it, to allow for transactions, for trust, to allow for ID verifications, and most importantly, for means of control back into these companies. That's what Ontology Network stands for. It's why it benefits so greatly to Neo as well. So guys, that's it from me for this talk. I really hope it's helped you unpack Ontology, and I'll be talking more about it in the future. But for right now, enjoy the launch that's coming up. and I'll certainly be following as much as I can on Twitter. So find me on Brad_Laurie. But right now it's Blockchain Brad signing out. Cheers.